The October wind cut through Millbrook's dusty main street like a blade, carrying with it the acrid smell of burning wood and the fevered shouts of the gathering crowd. Sarah Coleman stood bound to the wooden stake in the town square, her wrists raw from the coarse rope that held her fast. The kindling stacked around her feet rustled with each gust, and she could feel the heat from the torches held by men who had once tipped their hats to her in greeting. "Witch!" someone screamed from the crowd. "She cursed my crops, made my cattle sick. My baby's been fevering since she looked at him." Another voice joined the chorus. Sarah's dark hair whipped across her face as she lifted her chin, meeting the accusatory stares with quiet defiance. 3 weeks ago, she had been nothing more than the town's seamstress, mending clothes and keeping to herself in the small cabin her father had left her. Then the drought came, the livestock began dying, and Mrs. Henderson's infant fell ill. In a town gripped by fear and desperation, someone needed to be blamed. Someone different. Someone alone. Judge Morrison stepped forward, his black coat billowing in the wind. He was a thin man with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to burn with righteous fury. In his hands he held a leather-bound book that he claimed contained the testimonies against her. "Sarah Coleman," he announced, his voice carrying over the crowd, "you have been found guilty of practicing witchcraft, of consorting with dark forces, and of bringing calamity upon this God-fearing community. The sentence is death by fire to purify your soul and protect the innocent." The crowd roared its approval, but Sarah noticed not everyone joined in. Some faces looked troubled, uncertain. Old Mr. Jenkins, who had known her father, stared at his boots. Mary Sullivan, whose wedding dress Sarah had sewn just last spring, had tears streaming down her cheeks. But their voices were drowned out by those who thirsted for blood, for someone to blame for their misfortunes. At the edge of the crowd, barely visible in the lengthening shadows of late afternoon, stood a figure that made Sarah's heart skip. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn leather and dusty denim, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. She had seen him before 3 days ago, when he had ridden into town on a paint horse, asking quietly for supplies in a room at the boarding house. He had been in Murphy's general store when the mob had dragged her from her cabin, and she remembered how his hand had moved instinctively toward the gun at his hip before he caught himself. Now he stood perfectly still, watching. While everyone else shouted and gestured, he remained motionless as carved stone. But Sarah could feel his gaze on her, steady and unwavering. Judge Morrison raised his torch high. "Let the purifying flames consume the evil that has plagued our town." The crowd pressed closer, their faces twisted with fear and bloodlust. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the heat of the approaching flame against her skin. She thought of her father, of the quiet evenings they had spent reading by lamplight, of the simple life she had built for herself. All of it ending here, in smoke and ash and the screams of people who had once called her neighbor. But the torch never touched the kindling. The sharp crack of a gunshot split the air, and Judge Morrison's torch went spinning from his hand, extinguished in the dirt. The crowd stumbled backward, confused and frightened, as the stranger stepped forward from the shadows, his revolver still smoking in his steady grip. "That's far enough," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the sudden silence. It was a voice that had seen violence, had spoken over the graves of both good men and bad, calm and sure as winter stone. Judge Morrison sputtered with rage. "Who dares interfere with divine justice? This woman is a witch, a danger to us all." The stranger's pale blue eyes fixed on the judge, and Morrison took an involuntary step backward. "Justice?" The gunslinger's voice held no emotion, but something deadly cold lurked beneath the surface. "Looks more like murder to me." "She brought the drought," someone shouted from the crowd. "Made our children sick." "Did she?" The stranger's gaze swept over the gathered townsfolk, and several shifted uncomfortably under his stare. "Or did your wells run dry because you didn't dig them deep enough? Did your crops fail because you planted them in ground you knew was poor? Did your children get sick because that's what children do when winter comes early?" His words hit like physical blows. Sarah could see doubt creeping into some faces. But Judge Morrison's expression only hardened. "Stand aside, stranger. This is not your concern." The gunslinger took another step forward, and now Sarah could see his face clearly beneath the brim of his hat. It was weathered and scarred, with the kind of lines that came from squinting into sun and wind. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and his dark hair was shot through with early gray despite his apparent youth. But his eyes held depths that spoke of things seen and done that no man should carry. "Making it my concern," he said simply. And there was something in those 4 words that made even the boldest in the crowd step back. Judge Morrison's hand moved toward the pistol at his side, but froze as the stranger's gun barrel shifted slightly in his direction. "I wouldn't," the gunslinger advised. "Been a long day. Rather not make it longer." For a moment, the square was silent except for the wind and the crackle of abandoned torches. Then Judge Morrison's face twisted with frustrated rage. "This woman is cursed, evil. You save her, you damn us all." "Then I guess we'll all go to hell together," the stranger replied and shot the rope that bound Sarah to the stake. Sarah's legs nearly gave out as the severed rope fell away from her wrists. She stumbled forward, catching herself against the wooden post, her circulation slowly returning in painful tingles. The gunslinger was beside her in 2 quick strides, his left hand steady on her elbow, while his right kept his weapon trained on the increasingly agitated crowd. "Can you ride?" he asked quietly, not taking his eyes off Judge Morrison and the advancing townspeople. "I think so," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from 3 days in the town jail with little water. "Good. My horse is behind Murphy's store. Bay paint, white blaze, get on him and wait for me there. But what about go, now?" The authority in his voice brooked no argument. Sarah pushed herself away from the stake and began walking quickly toward the edge of the square, acutely aware of the hostile stares following her every step. Behind her she heard Judge Morrison's voice rising again. "You're making a grave mistake, stranger. That woman has the devil in her." "Maybe," the gunslinger replied, his tone conversational. "But I've met the devil. He wears a suit and talks pretty. She just looks like a scared woman to me." Sarah reached the corner of Murphy's store and broke into a run, her long skirts hampering her movements. Behind the building, she found the paint horse exactly where he had said it would be, a sturdy, intelligent-looking animal that watched her approach with calm brown eyes. She had grown up around horses on her father's small farm, but it had been years since she had ridden. Gathering her courage, she grabbed the saddle horn and pulled herself up, settling into the worn leather seat just as another gunshot cracked through the evening air. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she waited, praying she wouldn't hear the stranger's voice crying out in pain. Instead, she heard his boots running across the hard-packed earth. He appeared around the corner of the building, moving with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to violence. Without breaking stride, he swung up behind her in the saddle, his arms coming around her to take the reins. "Hold on," he said, and spurred the horse into motion. They thundered through Millbrook's back streets, past startled chickens and barking dogs, heading for the open country beyond the town limits. Sarah risked a glance back and saw torches bobbing in the gathering darkness as a posse formed to pursue them. Judge Morrison's voice carried on the wind, shouting orders and promises of reward. The stranger guided their mount toward a line of hills that rose like sleeping giants against the star-scattered sky. Sarah had lived in Millbrook all her life, but she had never ventured far into the wilderness beyond the town's borders. Out here, the land seemed vast and empty, full of shadows and unknown dangers. They rode hard for what felt like hours, the horse's hooves drumming a steady rhythm against the rocky ground. The stranger said nothing, but Sarah could feel the tension in his body, the way he constantly checked their back trail and scanned the horizon for signs of pursuit. Finally, when the lights of Millbrook had disappeared entirely behind them, he brought the horse to a walk and then to a stop beside a small stream that wound its way between the hills. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said, dismounting and offering his hand to help her down. "Let the horse drink and catch his breath." Sarah slid from the saddle, her legs shaking with exhaustion and delayed shock. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the full weight of what had happened began to settle on her shoulders. She was an outcast now, hunted and homeless, dependent on the kindness of a stranger whose name she didn't even know. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you help me? The gunslinger knelt beside the stream, cupping water in his hands to drink. In the moonlight, his face looked carved from granite. But you don't know I'm innocent, Sarah pressed. For all you know, I really could be what they say I am. He looked up at her then, his pale eyes reflecting the starlight. I've seen real evil, miss. Worn a badge for most of my life, tracked down men who'd kill their own mothers for $1. Evil has a smell to it, a weight. You don't carry it. Then what do I carry? She asked, sinking down on a fallen log beside the stream. Pain, he said without hesitation. Loss, loneliness, same things most folks carry, just more honest about it. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the gentle murmur of water over stones. Finally, Sarah worked up the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. What's your name? Cole, he said after a moment's hesitation. Cole Matthews. I'm Sarah Coleman, though I suppose you already knew that. Heard them say it often enough, Cole agreed grimly, along with a few other things that ain't fit for repeating. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the night's chill settling into her bones. Where will we go? They'll follow us, won't they? Judge Morrison will try, Cole admitted. Man like that, he can't let it stand that someone defied him in front of the whole town, but I know this country better than he does. We'll stay ahead of them. And then what? We can't run forever. Cole was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if he had heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. No, we can't. But sometimes running is all you got left. There was something in those words, some deeper pain that made Sarah study his profile in the moonlight. She saw the weight he carried, the burden of choices made and prices paid. Whatever. His story was whatever had brought him to Millbrook at just the right moment to save her life. It was written in the lines of his face and the careful way he held himself, always ready for trouble. Thank you, she said softly. Whatever happens next, thank you for giving me a chance. Cole stood and walked to where the horse was cropping grass beside the stream. Don't thank me yet, he said, swinging back into the saddle. We've got a long way to go before you're safe. As Sarah settled in front of him and they continued their flight into the darkness, she wondered if anywhere in the world was truly safe for someone like her, someone who had been marked as different, as dangerous, as other. But for now, she had this stranger's protection and the vast wilderness stretching out before them. It would have to be enough. By dawn, they had put 20 miles between themselves and Millbrook, following deer trails and creek beds that would make them harder to track. Cole had pushed them through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and share water from his canteen. Now, as the first light of morning painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and rose, they made camp in a hidden valley surrounded by towering pines. Sarah helped Cole unsaddle the horse and set up a cold camp, no fire that might give away their position to pursuing eyes. Her hands shook with exhaustion as she spread his bedroll near a fallen log, but she was grateful for something useful to do. The past few hours had given her too much time to think, to remember the faces of people she had once considered friends, twisted with hate and fear. Get some sleep, Cole said, settling down with his back against a tree where he could watch the valley's only entrance. His rifle lay across his knees, and Sarah noticed he had positioned himself so that she would be behind him if trouble came up the trail. What about you? She asked, wrapping her shawl around herself as a blanket. I'll keep watch. Don't need much sleep anyway. Sarah wanted to protest, to insist that he rest too, but the words died in her throat as she saw the way he held himself. Alert, watchful, dangerous. This was a man who had survived by never letting his guard down, and she sensed that her safety depended on letting him do what he did best. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept churning over the events of the past few days. The accusations had started small, whispered rumors about her strange behavior, the way animals seemed to trust her, how she sometimes seemed to know things before they happened. Mrs. Henderson claimed Sarah had given her infant the evil eye. Farmer Bradley swore his best milk cow had gone dry after Sarah had walked past his fence. Judge Morrison had seized on these superstitions like a man grasping at salvation, turning the town's fears into a weapon. But what troubled Sarah most was the nagging suspicion that maybe, just maybe, there was a grain of truth in their accusations. Not witchcraft. She didn't believe in such things, but something else, something she had never fully understood about herself. The way she could sometimes sense people's moods, predict when storms were coming, know instinctively which herbs would help a sick animal. Her father had called it intuition, a gift for reading the natural world. But in a town full of frightened, desperate people, gifts could quickly become curses. She must have dozed despite her troubled thoughts, because when she woke, the sun was high overhead, and Cole was cooking something over a small, smokeless fire. The smell made her stomach growl with painful hunger. She hadn't eaten since her arrest 3 days ago. "Rabbit," Cole said, noticing her attention. "Caught him in a snare this morning. Figured we were far enough ahead to risk a fire." "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the portion of meat he handed her. It was simple fare, but it tasted better than any meal she could remember. As they ate, Cole studied her with those pale, assessing eyes. Finally, he asked the question she had been dreading. "So what really happened back there? Why'd they decide you were a witch?" Sarah set down her food, her appetite suddenly gone. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. "People started getting scared when the drought came and the livestock began dying. They needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. Convenient how? I live alone. No family left, no husband to protect me. I keep to myself, don't attend church regular. I know a bit about herbs and healing, which some folks find suspicious." She met his gaze directly. "But I never hurt anyone, never cursed anyone or worked any magic. I'm just a seamstress who minds her own business." Cole nodded slowly. "Figured as much. But there's something you're not telling me." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. This man was too perceptive, saw too much. "I don't know what you mean. You've got a way about you," Cole continued, his voice gentle but persistent. "Animals trust you. That horse took to you like you'd been riding him for years. And back in town, when you looked at people, really looked at them, some of them couldn't meet your eyes. That's not fear of witchcraft, that's fear of being seen." For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. She had never spoken to anyone about the strange knowing that sometimes came over her, the way she could look at a person and understand things about them that they kept hidden. Her father had warned her to keep such things to herself, to never let others see how clearly she could read their hearts. "Sometimes," she said finally, "I can tell things about people. Not magic, just understanding. When someone's lying, or when they're afraid, or when they're carrying guilt about something." Mrs. Henderson's baby wasn't cursed. He was sick because she'd been giving him laudanum to make him sleep so she could slip away to meet with Thomas Garrett behind her husband's back. Farmer Bradley's cow went dry because he'd been watering down the milk he sold, and the stress was affecting her production. Cole raised an eyebrow. "You knew all that?" "I could see it in their faces, in the way they carried themselves. People think their secrets are hidden, but guilt has a weight to it. It changes how you move, how you look at others." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "I never said anything, never accused anyone, but they knew I could see, and that made them afraid. So when they needed a scapegoat, you were perfect," Cole said grimly. "The woman who sees too much, who makes people uncomfortable with her knowing looks." Something like that. Sarah picked up a stick and poked at the fire, watching sparks rise into the clear mountain air. "My father always told me it was a gift, but it's felt more like a curse. People don't want to be seen, not really. They want to hide their sins and pretend they're better than they are. And you won't let them. I can't help it, it's like asking someone not to see the color blue." Cole was quiet for a long time, staring out at the forest that surrounded their hidden valley. When he spoke again, his voice was soft and far away. "I know something about gifts that feel like curses," he said. about seeing things others can't or won't, about carrying knowledge that weighs you down. There was pain in his words, old and deep, and Sarah found herself leaning forward despite her usual caution. What do you mean? Cole's hand moved unconsciously to the star-shaped scar on his left temple, tracing the old wound with his fingertips. I was a lawman for 15 years. Started young. Thought I could make a difference in the world. Had a talent for reading situations, for knowing when violence was coming, for tracking down men who didn't want to be found. His pale eyes grew distant, focused on memories that clearly brought him no comfort. Got good at it. Too good. Started seeing patterns other folks missed, connecting crimes across territories, understanding the minds of killers and thieves better than I wanted to. People called it instinct, said I had a gift for law work. But it wasn't that simple, Sarah guessed. No, it wasn't. Because when you can see evil clearly, when you understand how it works and why it does what it does, you start carrying a piece of it inside you. You make choices, hard choices, and each one changes you a little. Pretty soon you're not sure where the law ends and the darkness begins. Cole stood abruptly and walked to where his horse was grazing, checking the animal's legs and hooves with practiced efficiency. Sarah sensed he was trying to distance himself from the conversation, from memories he didn't want to examine too closely. What happened? She asked softly. What made you stop being a lawman? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I became the very thing I'd been hunting, he said, and when I realized it, I put down the badge and walked away. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken pain and regret. Sarah wanted to ask more, to understand what had driven this strong, capable man to abandon the life he had built for himself. But she recognized the look on his face, the same expression she saw in her own mirror when she thought about her father's death, about the loneliness and fear that had defined her existence in Millbrook. Some wounds were too deep for words, some secrets too painful to share with strangers. Instead, she simply said, I'm sorry. Cole looked back at her, surprise flickering across his weathered features. For what? For whatever happened to you, for the choices that brought you pain, for the burden of seeing too much and knowing too much. She managed a small smile. We're quite a pair, aren't we? The woman who sees people's secrets, and the man who ran from his own. Something shifted in Cole's expression then, a crack in the wall he had built around his emotions. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess we are. As they prepared to break camp and continue their journey deeper into the wilderness, Sarah found herself wondering what other secrets lay hidden in her mysterious rescuer's past. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the mountain wind, she thought she could hear the sound of hoofbeats drawing closer. The posse found them on the third day, just as Sarah had feared they would. She and Cole were following a narrow game trail through a canyon when the crack of a rifle echoed off the stone walls, and Cole's hat went spinning from his head with a neat hole punched through the crown. Down! Cole barked, diving from the saddle and dragging Sarah with him behind a jumble of fallen rocks. Above them, positioned on the canyon rim, she could see the silhouettes of at least 6 men against the afternoon sky. There's nowhere to run, Matthews! Judge Morrison's voice boomed down from above, distorted by the stone walls but still carrying clearly. You're trapped down there like rats in a barrel. Cole drew his revolver and checked the cylinder, his face grim but calm. How many rounds you figure they got up there? He asked Sarah quietly. I don't know, she whispered, pressing herself against the rocks as another shot rang out, sending stone chips flying dangerously close to their hiding spot. Does it matter? Always matters. Every bullet they fire is one less they have to use. Cole peered around the edge of their makeshift fort, studying the canyon walls with the eye of a man who had fought his way out of similar situations before. See that ledge about 30 feet up on the left side? If I can reach it, I might be able to work my way around behind them. That's suicide, Sarah protested. They'll cut you down before you get halfway up. Maybe. But staying here's guaranteed. Death. They've got the high ground and all the time in the world. Eventually, they'll work around to where they can finish us. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to think. She had always been good at reading people, at understanding their fears and motivations. Judge Morrison was up there not just for justice, but to prove his authority hadn't been challenged without consequence. The other men with him, she tried to remember who had been in the crowd that day, which faces had showed the most hatred and fear. Bradley's up there, she said suddenly, the farmer whose cow went dry, and Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's husband. They're not here for justice, they're here because they're afraid of what I know about them. Cole looked at her sharply. Meaning, what? Meaning they're not really interested in bringing me back for trial. They want me dead so their secrets die with me. Sarah's mind raced as she thought through the implications. Morrison might want to take me back alive for a proper hanging, but they'd be just as happy to tell the town I was killed resisting capture. That might work in our favor, Cole mused. Fear makes men stupid, makes them take chances they shouldn't. Another volley of shots rang out from above, and Sarah heard the sound of men scrambling over rocks, trying to find better positions. They were getting impatient, which meant they were also getting careless. Bradley! Cole called out suddenly, his voice carrying clearly in the canyon's acoustics. Tom Bradley, that you up there? The shooting stopped abruptly. After a moment, a different voice answered, nervous, defensive. What's it to you, stranger? Just wondering if your wife knows where you are, Cole replied conversationally, or if she thinks you're out checking on that sick cow of yours. Silence from above. Sarah saw Cole's strategy now. He was using what she had told him about reading. People's secrets, turning their own fears against them. That's right, Bradley, Cole continued. The seamstress here, she knows all about that cow, about why she really went dry, about what you were doing with the milk money while your family went without proper food. You shut your lying mouth. Bradley's voice cracked with panic. Henderson, Cole called out next. Your wife's baby getting better, is he? Sleeping through the night now that she's not dosing him with laudanum anymore? This time the silence was longer, more profound. Sarah could imagine the looks the men were giving each other, the sudden doubt and suspicion taking root in their minds. Don't listen to him. Judge Morrison's voice boomed with authority. He's trying to divide us, to turn us against each other. The witch has poisoned his mind with her evil. But the damage was done. Sarah could feel it even from their position at the bottom of the canyon, the fragile unity of the posse beginning to fracture as each man wondered what secrets the others might be carrying, what truths the strange woman might reveal if she lived to tell them. Cole caught her eye and nodded toward the ledge he had identified earlier. When I make my move, you run for those trees at the mouth of the canyon. Don't look back, don't wait for me, just run. I won't leave you, Sarah said fiercely. You will if you're smart. I've lived my life, made my choices. You deserve a chance to make yours. Before Sarah could protest further, Cole was moving, sprinting from their cover toward the canyon wall with a fluid grace that spoke of years of experience in deadly situations. The men above opened fire immediately, but their shots went wild, disrupted by their earlier argument and the pressure of making quick decisions. Cole reached the wall and began climbing, his movements sure and steady despite the bullets whining around him. Sarah watched in fascination and terror as he worked his way up the sheer rock face, using every small handhold and ledge with the skill of a man who had spent his life in wild country. But halfway to the ledge, disaster struck. A bullet, fired by some lucky or skilled marksman above, struck the rock inches from Cole's left hand. The impact sent stone fragments flying, and one sharp piece opened a gash across his knuckles. His grip loosened, and for a heart-stopping moment Sarah thought he would fall. Instead, Cole managed to catch himself on a narrow outcropping, his body pressed flat against the rock face. But now he was exposed, pinned down with nowhere to go. The men above realized their advantage and began concentrating their fire on his position. Give it up, Matthews, Judge Morrison called down triumphantly. Come down now and we'll make it quick. Sarah saw Cole's situation with painful clarity. He had maybe minutes before a lucky shot found its mark or his strength gave out. The posse held all the advantages, and there was nothing she could do to help him from her position behind the rocks. Nothing except the one thing she had always been afraid to do. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped out from behind their shelter, her hands raised but her voice carrying clearly through the canyon. Judge Morrison, she called. I want to make a deal." The firing stopped immediately. Sarah could feel the attention of every man above focused on her like a physical weight. "There are no deals with the devil, witch." Morrison's voice was full of righteous fury, but Sarah heard something else underneath. Curiosity, perhaps even greed. "I'm not asking you to deal with the devil," Sarah replied, walking slowly into the center of the canyon floor where all the men could see her clearly. "I'm asking you to deal with a woman who knows things that could make you the most powerful man in 3 counties. Cole, still clinging to the rock wall 30 feet above, stared down at her with something like horror on his face. But Sarah ignored him, focusing all her attention on the invisible audience above. "I know where Tom Bradley hides the money he skims from his milk sales," she continued, her voice steady and strong. "I know about Henderson's gambling debts, about the IOUs he's been forging to keep his creditors at bay. I know which of the town council members have been taking bribes from the railroad company, and which ones have been stealing from the church building fund." The silence from above was deafening. Sarah could almost hear the mental calculations taking place, the rapid reassessment of her value alive versus dead. "She's lying." That was Bradley's voice, high and desperate. "She's trying to save her own skin." "Am I, Tom?" Sarah looked directly up at the canyon rim, even though she couldn't see the man's face from that distance. "Then tell me, why did you start watering down your milk 3 months ago? Was it before or after you lost that poker game to Garrett from the next county?" The answering silence was all the confirmation she needed. Sarah pressed her advantage. "Judge Morrison, you're an ambitious man. You want to be more than a small-town magistrate. But advancement requires leverage, requires knowing where the bodies are buried." She spread her arms wide, offering herself as a target, but also as a prize. "I can give you that knowledge, all of it. Names, dates, amounts, locations. Everything. You'd need to control every important man in the territory. Don't listen to her." Henderson's voice cracked like a whip. "She's a witch. She'll corrupt you, damn your soul." "Will I?" Sarah asked mildly. "Or will I make you rich and powerful beyond your wildest dreams?" She could feel the moment of decision approaching, could sense the balance of power shifting as greed warred with fear in the minds of the men above. Judge Morrison was tempted. She could hear it in his silence, in the way he didn't immediately reject her offer. But the others, the ones with the most to lose, would never let her live to bargain, which was exactly what she had been counting on. "Kill her!" Bradley screamed suddenly, his voice breaking with panic. "Kill her now before she damns us all." The unity of the posse shattered like glass. Some of the men, Morrison's allies, hesitated. Others, driven by fear and desperation, raised their rifles. And in that moment of confusion and divided purpose, Cole made his move. He launched himself from the rock wall not toward the ledge, but in a controlled fall toward the canyon floor. He hit the ground hard, rolled, and came up running toward Sarah with his gun drawn and firing. His first shot took Bradley in the shoulder, spinning the farmer around and sending his rifle clattering into the canyon. His second shot sent Henderson diving for cover behind a boulder. The remaining members of the posse, suddenly finding themselves caught between conflicting orders and deadly accurate return fire, began to scatter. "The horses!" Cole shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her toward the mouth of the canyon. "They left their horses down here." Indeed, the posse's mounts were tied to trees at the canyon entrance, nervous and rolling their eyes at the sound of gunfire, but still where their owners had left them. Cole and Sarah reached the animals just as Morrison and his remaining men began scrambling down the canyon walls in pursuit. Cole boosted Sarah onto the nearest horse, then swung up behind her, spurring the animal into an immediate gallop just as the first pursuers reached the canyon floor. Behind them, Sarah could hear Morrison's voice roaring with frustrated rage, promising terrible vengeance for their escape. But they were free, racing through the wilderness with the setting sun, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Sarah allowed herself to believe they might actually survive it. "That was insane," Cole said, as they put distance between themselves and their pursuers. "Brilliant, but completely insane." "It worked, didn't it?" Sarah replied, surprised by her own satisfaction. For once, her ability to see people's hidden truths had been a weapon instead of a burden. This time. But Morrison won't give up, not after being humiliated like that. Sarah nodded, understanding. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Judge Morrison's pride had been wounded, his authority challenged, his ambitions thwarted. He would keep coming, keep hunting, until one of them was dead. But as they rode deeper into the wilderness, Sarah found she wasn't afraid anymore. She had Cole beside her, had proven she could fight back when cornered, had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. Let Morrison come. Let them all come. She was no longer the frightened seamstress who had been dragged from her cabin 3 days ago. She was something new, something harder, something that wouldn't go quietly into the flames. And beside her rode a man who had stepped from the shadows to pull her from those flames, who had chosen to stand with her against a world that wanted her destroyed. Whatever secrets haunted his past, whatever demons drove him into the wilderness, he had made his choice. They both had. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah Coleman and Cole Matthews rode on together, two damaged souls finding strength in each other as they faced an uncertain but no longer hopeless future. Behind them lay the town that had rejected them, the people who had sought their destruction. Ahead lay the vast wilderness of the American frontier, dangerous and unforgiving but also free. They would face other challenges, other enemies, other moments when the world seemed determined to crush them beneath its weight. But they would face them together, the woman who saw too much and the man who had learned to live with what he had seen. In saving her from the flames, Cole had perhaps saved something in himself as well, and in refusing to burn quietly, Sarah had discovered that sometimes the greatest magic was simply the courage to stand up and fight back. The horses' hoofbeats drummed a steady rhythm against the earth as they disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the echo of their passage and the promise that some flames once kindled could never truly be extinguished.